Requiem aeterna.
Hi there, this is Brent.
And this is Amanda,
We are the Unreliable Narrators.
here to talk about the strangeness, the mystery, and the wonder of Gene Wolfe's prose.
What is time?
What is memory?
What is a person?
Is this reality?
Where are we?
Do we exist?
Have you ever considered that all your choices brought you right here to this very moment?
Episode number 24, Robert Borski in the Crowded Part of Heaven. First published in Science Fiction Emphasis 1 in 1974, edited by David Gerald and published by Ballantine Books.
So we're doing a Borski episode?
Apparently so.
How is Borski relevant for a wolf podcast?
I was going to ask you that question.
Oh, well, to answer your question, Amanda, listeners, if they have been in the wolf constellation for any time.
Hanging out in the connected wolf universe.
Yeah. So Robert Borski, he's an author.
Yes.
He has his own published fiction, and he also has published poetry.
Yes.
And he's still publishing to this day. He's not a past writer, but he interacted with Wolfe early on, and he was on the Earth list. He is known for publishing different theories and analyses of Wolfe's work. Some of it, people sometimes think he gets out there and pushes crazy theories. My sense is that he kind of is like, okay, well, if we take this to be the case, how far can we push this analysis? Right. So I think he ends up rubbing some people the wrong way because he's speaking in hypotheticals and then...
Like, if Latro was a werewolf.
Yeah. So the stuff that I've read of his, I would recommend people.
Well, I find him very interesting. So I've only read the long and short of it. I haven't read that extensively in his work, but I find his theories interesting, if not always convincing.
Yeah. Okay. That's one of the ones I haven't actually read.
Okay. Yeah. And this is, again, I don't want to pronounce too much because I have only read a little bit, but the sense I get is that he is going after an interpretation as long as he can find meaning from it. And I do appreciate that. He seems to be looking for something that is meaningful, not just a, can I make this fit the facts kind of thing, but he's looking for something that adds some depth to the interpretation.
Yeah. And I think that's valid and probably a method that we should keep in mind, because a lot of times, I'm not excluding myself from this comment.
Okay.
But I think a lot of times people will get too wrapped up in what does this mean or how does this work, and forgetting the fact that first Wolfe was writing a story.
Yes.
And he also had a particular background and particular styles and methodologies and influences that went into that. And sometimes I feel like people are just treating the whole thing as though it's a puzzle box instead of something to be experienced as a sub-creation.
Well, and not to put too fine of a point on it, but we think that he has made up symbols and put them in his story. And yet, to quote Gene Wolfe, symbols make us. We are their creatures. We're shaped by them. So he plays with so many things, so many mythologies and so many ideas. And he seems to be telling stories out of that rich fertility of what he has taken in. And so then, yeah, maybe that isn't a super connected symbol, but maybe it is connected in some way above and beyond and through his intention. Okay, Borski.
Yeah, so this is an early Borski story. I don't think it's his first published short story, but this is one of the earlier published ones.
Yeah.
In the Crowded Part of Heaven.
Yes. That seems to be a fairly meaningful phrase.
It does. So it starts out, this is a first-person narrative where you are attached to a man's perspective. And they said, try Boston. So I did. I was lucky. 2 hours later, I had a contract. So her name was Westcott, or as she put it, Abigail Westcott, of the once famous Farthington Westcotts.
Yeah, she was tall and attractive, a potential debutante. And better yet, she was quick with her money.
So this is broken up into sections,
Yes.
kind of reminiscent of the older pulp science fiction stories you get where they had chapter breakings, even though it's so short. Now we'd probably just put a break. But in section 1, we're kind of slowly working into, we're not entirely sure what's going on.
Yeah.
And we get to the midpoint and, oh, this is a male prostitute or gigolo or somebody who's, I don't know what the high class equivalent of.
I don't know that there is a high class name for a gigolo, but it is strange going on here. So we're not quite clear in the first part of the narrative what the contract is about and what it is, but it does seem to be very much a cultural given. They use language like a standard contract or a divergent one, which seem to be referring to specific context and limitations. We don't get the sense that there's something strange going on for the narrative context. So this male gigolo, male companion with a 2-month contract.
So they agree on a standard, and he replies, with all children to be negotiated.
Yes, which is, kind of throws you.
It does.
Or me, anyway.
Well, it threw me too. So then I was kind of shifting a little, and I was like, oh, is this a future where marriage is somewhat different, or like the customs surrounding it are different? And I'm just going through the options and like, oh, or they're not that, have a lot of men died off, or
right. So is this sorry, I almost made a Life of Brian reference, but I stopped myself real quick since we don't have an explicit tag on this. But yeah, there isn't a lot of context given, and it does seem to be his services are in demand. And the fact that she's very wealthy and very attractive doesn't seem to be restricting her from needing or wanting to hire him under a contract.
Yeah. And then as it goes on, so we're in Boston. She's an American.
Yeah.
And we find out that he is French.
Yeah, or at least he's going under a French name.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what do you call yourselves in France? She asks.
You handed that off as though I'm going to attempt.
You don't have the French pronunciation? I saw a meme once that was, how do you speak French? First you learn Spanish, then you learn Italian, and you subtract the Italian from the Spanish. Or it's speak Latin, but make it fashion. I say you start to pronounce it, and then you start slurring it, and then that's about how you do. I haven't ever studied French. Journée dorée, I think is how you would pronounce that, but I could be entirely wrong. Let's just go ahead and translate it, because she translates it, the golden youth.
And his reply is, that's close enough.
Excellent. And that goes for my French pronunciation as well.
Yeah. Not only are we alienating listeners, but now we just mocked an entire cultural heritage on our planet. So good job.
I'm not making fun of the French for pronouncing French that way. I'm making fun of myself for having no knowledge of how to pronounce French.
Okay.
I think.
Good cover.
Okay. We'll pretend that's it.
That's the end of the section.
Yeah.
And then we have chapter 2. I'm saying chapter. Section 1 was literally
a page.
So he's back at her house, and they're talking about the brick walls, and it's the color of oxblood. Complete side note here, but if any listeners have a home library at home, oxblood is the color you want to paint that room because it really makes the books pop.
Excellent commentary.
So, but the oxblood comes up because they're looking at the house she's living in, and it's a modern, for the time period of the story, it's a modern house, but it's designed to look like an older.
Yeah, neo-colonial, I guessed, is the style. Built within the last 20 years. And then she's like, oh, well, you're not supposed to be able to tell. It's guaranteed to look authentic old Boston.
Yeah, and then there's some commentary that we get in here where he is explaining that he writes all this stuff off as a hobby, but his commentary to us, the reader, his internal monologue is nobody ever thought that I'd actually need an education, so it's just
Right.
easier not to tell them. So.
Yeah. So he has an architectural education, but yeah, everybody assumed he had no need for education. Yeah, so the door has a voice print device, and so she has to verbally authorize them to get in.
Yeah. As far as I can tell from reading this, we don't get an exact date at how far we are in the future, but there's a voice print lock, and that in the 70s, that would have been a fairly futuristic item.
Yeah, nice futuristic detail.
Yeah, but we still, like, the United States is still in existence. France is still in existence.
Yes.
So my sense is we're somewhat in the near future. Maybe he was envisioning like 50 years out.
From when he wrote it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then our narrative character, says, oh, he likes the house. It has an aura of magnitude and coziness, real nice, even if it is a trifle large for one person. You must share it with someone, which was my way of asking whether or not she had a husband or lover, which he's been hired, and now he's trying to find out what her family situation is.
Yeah, it seems a little risky to accept a 2-month contract without him actually knowing what he's signing up for.
Certainly.
I think that's a bit of the world building there where he's desperate enough to get into a contract that he doesn't necessarily vet out these people as much as he could or probably should, because I'm going to guess that the fact that he's asking is like, well, a husband or a boyfriend may not be so happy that I'm here.
Right. And another layer there is he has a sense of physical security that he didn't vet out the contract or doesn't need to vet out the contract because there's something in this cultural context that secures him from harm.
Yeah. So her reply here, no, I'm afraid not. My parents died years ago, and since I don't get along with ordinary...
Yeah, she trails off.
Yeah, so we get another little hint here about, he's claiming to be from a French background, and they're in the U.S., but...
There's something about him that sets him out from ordinary men, which is presumably what she was going to say. And I mean, our sense that there's something strange about him hiring on for a 2-month contract with children, each child to be negotiated, then this just emphasizes that sense that there must be something different here.
Yeah. And so then she apologizes. I didn't mean it that way. It was a bad choice of words.
Yeah, and he reassures her, don't worry about it. I've been called everything from a goon baby to a bâtard gentique. Throw in a couple of half-breeds and you'll complete the roster. Not being ordinary is somewhat of a compliment. I forced a laugh as if to show it didn't bother me.
At this point, where there is the discussion of the half-breed and the not being ordinary.
Yes.
I was kind of thinking that he might have been during a war, he might be a
child of an invading army or an occupying army.
Yeah. That's kind of where my mind went.
Aftermath of Korean War kind of situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess maybe I should ask. In my mind, his name's Dennis.
I think so. Yeah, Denys, but I think that's pronounced Dennis. Although if we're French, it's probably Denis.
Yeah.
But that's okay. We're Americans. We'll butcher it and then we'll call our fried potatoes French fries.
Yeah, I can't add anything to that comment.
Okay.
Yeah, so his name's Dennis, and I should have mentioned that earlier because we got that when he introduced himself.
Yes, at the beginning. Sorry.
Yeah, but she says he's well-adjusted.
Yeah, well-adjusted for an alpha. I mean, you're not bitter or anything.
This is a new slang term for him.
Yes, the first time that we've seen it in the story.
Yeah, and so he has to ask about it. Like, what does it mean? Her response is it's an acronym, not a very good one, but it's become very popular on the East Coast. It stands for alien plus human.
Okay, so now, and then he adds, which is exactly what I am. Here we have the reveal. He's a bastard, Batard, half alien, half human.
Yeah. There's the question there, like, how alien is he?
Yes.
And so this kind of, obviously, he's alien enough that he stood out.
She knew exactly what he was.
Yeah, and so she knew what she was getting into with the contract. But at this point in the story, I got the sense that he was humanoid. He looked roughly human.
Yeah, which is exactly what I am. The more I thought about it, the better I liked it. So he likes this slur or slang. Sired by an unknown alien. Okay, it's unknown. Is it that the individual was unknown, or is it that the alien species is unknown? Is this a I was kidnapped and probed kind of situation? Or what's going on here?
Yeah.
We don't know. Mothered by a French woman, raised as a goon baby, an alpha. It was that simple.
This next section here, because he says, but look at what you've done, I teased. You've reduced my heritage to a single word. I don't know if I should be happy or not.
Make it happy, she said, standing. It was about time, exclamation point. I watched her canter over to me and felt my pulse rate quicken. And dropping down into an autistic level of thought, I found what I wanted. The autistic me. Just an ordinary guy with a nice wife and maybe one or two normal kids coming home from work. This was all dream work, with no need to worry about women who got off on me because I was different, and no need to feel like a sex freak. If only it could have been this way in real life. If only.
But it couldn't.
Yeah, so I had to pitch out before I got snared by my own hang-ups, trucked on back to reality.
So not only is he part alien,
yeah,
but he's in this contract negotiation system. And what he really wants is just to kind of live a normal life and have a wife, have a family.
Have a real job.
Yeah. And yet his desires are not matching up with the circumstances he's finding himself in.
Yeah. So he's a contract partner for a limited period of time, and he's fantasizing about what it would be like to be just a nice, ordinary guy with a nice, ordinary wife.
Yeah. And then we get a sense, too, that he knows these different comments are coming up because the reply there is no remorse until after your contract expires.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, yes, there we are. Just in time. I found the right words and pretended to squirm. I guess I'll have to. I can't afford to be released.
Yeah. Well, that's not awesome. I opened my arms then, and she made a successful bid for them. We kissed, and I guided her toward a couch. The rest came natural.
And then we have a scene break.
Yeah.
That's the end of section 2. So far, we've eased into, it's like, oh, this is odd. I don't know where I'm at. Oh, is he a gigolo? Oh.
Well, he's a half alien sex worker.
Yeah. On Earth.
Yeah, here on Earth.
In the U.S.
Yeah. I'm not sure that this is the most smoothly written story I've ever read. I have a few quibbles about some of the sentence structure here and kind of the tell, don't show that we've got going on in that scene. But there is something, I think, that is really well done here, and that's the communication of his responsibility to do the interpretive work. He's definitely in the subordinate position here. And so that interpretive emotional labor that is always the responsibility of the oppressed people or the subordinated people, whether it's as simple as the historic gender divide of men are like, women are so confusing. And women are like, no, you're just not doing the work to try to understand it. Like, I can speak man. Why can't you speak woman? I can understand you. You're no more different from me than I am from you. To obviously the more extreme cases of enslaved people and that kind of thing, that interpretive labor. And I think Borski does a good job of clarifying that as the contracted party, he has the responsibility to do that interpretive emotional labor to provide her with the experience that she's looking for and to modulate himself for it.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's a better explanation than I gave there when I was...
Oh, well, I wasn't trying to correct you, but, it's kind of fun.
We have scene where he's in the vibrospray shower. I assume that's something like an ultrasonic type of shower. So like another key that we can attach to the voice imprint on the lock that we are in the future.
Yep.
And so they come out and talk to each other. So she asks about when was the last time you saw your mother. 6 years ago, before your government commissioned me, I said. Why?
And this is, again, another layer. We saw this as some kind of spontaneous contract between two people. And apparently there's also a layer of government involvement.
Yeah. So he's an alien sex worker contracted by the U.S. government.
Yes.
It's,
okay.
That sounds like a tabloid title there.
Yeah, back to the National Enquirer from last episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, alien sex workers contracted by the government for lonely Bostonian women. Yeah, so he wants to know why she's interested in his mother, and she says, just curious, I was thinking that if I end up pregnant by you, then she and I will have gone through similar experiences.
Yeah, and this makes him angry. And he loses his composure of giving her the emotional...
Yes, giving her the emotional experience she wants.
Yeah, so he's angry, and you're getting your Virgin Mary's crossed.
Great line.
Yeah, and so he says, you paid for this, and my mother didn't.
Yeah, so you're choosing to have a baby with me, or to try to have a baby with me, and my mother didn't. So we're definitely getting a layer of, okay, part of the unknown here is also involuntary.
Yeah. This is just an editorial comment here. If somebody picks up this to read it, there is a line error here in section 3. If you read through it, you'll see where it is, but there's one of the lines should be down lower, and then one of the lower lines should be up in its place.
Yeah, and that is a little clunky.
It is. So this prompts him to wonder, found myself wondering what happened to my near perfect self-control, is what the line should read.
Yeah.
And then that's the oops, I got angry and I'm not giving her what I need. And too late, I realized I had overreacted.
Yeah, so she then cries, and her tears make emerald stains on her robe of green floss. So she responds very negatively to him saying, oh, but you want this, and she didn't want that. I mean, I think the generous interpretation of Abby here is that she's seeking out an unusual experience and then wanting a connection with someone else who has had a similar unusual experience. So thinking, okay, this isn't the kind of thing I'm going to be able to talk with the girls at brunch about, but somebody else has had some kind of similar experience.
Yeah. There's a line where I think this is as much commentary on humanity as it is. I think this is him speaking from his alien perspective, where he says, my apology wasn't good enough, however. Abby had to hurt me as much as I had hurt her.
Oh, you read that as from his alien perspective? I thought that was just a commentary on gender relations right there. I'm sorry, this is probably terrible, and now I'm going to get in trouble with listeners. It just seemed like there is a perception, often, between the genders, that women use their emotions as a weapon. And so, again, this doesn't have to be gendered, but I'm going to apologize too much, and then this won't make any sense. But somebody's emotional reaction to something uncomfortable is then read or perceived as a provocation. And so that just seemed to me kind of a fairly mundane misinterpretation of, oh, she's going to keep her emotions turned up until I'm as hurt by her emotions as she was by my comment.
Okay, I think that's a fair interpretation.
Okay.
The way I read it is his outlash at her was part of his humanity. And then his comment about she's going to have to hurt me as much as I hurt her was him gaining control and leaning on his alien character.
Interesting.
I don't know. Maybe that interpretation tells listeners more about me than it does about Borski's story. So,
and likewise, perhaps my interpretation says more about me than it does about these characters. Anyway, we get some interesting language here in chapter 3. We didn't quote it earlier, but after the Virgin Mary line, he says, "You paid for your miscegenal bliss." And then here he says, "And what's more, your child would be second generation, a quadroon." And so here Borski is using language from the long history of American racism and defining the blood percentile of children of mixed heritage.
Yeah. And this is where I was, and then this is where we should pull down that line, first generation there.
Right.
And then that's the end of these editing errors that we have in here. But yeah, he's definitely charging the story with the different aspects of the American race. I don't even know what the question isn't correct. It's like our fraudulent, turbulent racial history. Like, what does it mean to be American, and why are people so caught up on skin color? And it probably looks very ridiculous to the rest of the world.
Well, and I think that this is, I don't know about intent here, but this is one of the layers of interpretation with you have an actual alien human hybrid, and the language of racism transfers. This is part of what speculative fiction does, right? The language of racism transfers immediately, implicitly, without any modification. This is not a stretch to use racist language to talk about alien human mixing. And therefore, that should tell you something about how perverse that language is when applied to two different human beings. Our skin color happens to be different. Oh, let's just talk about blood percentile. Well, okay, anytime two people get married, there's enough genetic difference that it looks essentially the same.
Yeah.
So I found that language interesting, and I thought that was well deployed.
Yeah, there's a section here at the end of 3.
Yes.
Where she starts crying, and he says, "There wasn't much I could do. I think that if I had been physically possible, I would have joined her in her crying."
Yeah, so apparently he can't cry. Instead, he takes her in his arms and half-heartedly kisses her tears away. It suddenly seemed like it was going to be a very long 2 months.
Yeah, so we're the morning after. He's like, oh boy.
Yeah.
But we're getting a bit of how different is he?
Yes.
It appears that due to either from his alien side or a combination of the alien and human side, he's not able to cry.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that means he's not able to respond to the emotions, or is his tear ducts different?
Yeah, is he physically unable to produce tears because of some biological difference? I'm just going to aside here again on gender commentary. The male character can't cry, and the female character cries dramatically. Can he not cry because he's a man, or can he not cry because he's an alien?
I didn't think I was going to be getting this commentary.
I'm sorry.
No, this is good. And I think, this is good. And I think there's probably some aspect of it in there, especially where Borski's adding in the racial element.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if he was consciously adding in this gender line.
I think that it's explicitly there, but again. All right. The morning after the night before, I woke up early. Okay, here we are. Chapter 4.
Yeah.
With trench mouth and a headache.
It was raining.
Yeah.
Silver thumbprints drizzled down on the windows. I could see the clouds outside, tossing, billowing, crying.
Nice callback.
Mm-hmm. I feel mildly silly because I did not read in any of this the way that you read it. However, I think your reading is valid.
Okay.
So now I'm just like...
Now we have multiple perspectives. It's okay.
It is. And then I feel silly because in a previous episode, I referred to African as an African American. So I already have those...
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so I have those previous comments about race in my head, and I'm like, here I am, a white guy from Idaho talking about racial issues as though I've got anything to comment on. And then I totally miss this gender stuff. I promise you listeners, I do not have a baseball cap on backwards as we record this.
However, listeners, he does have a nice long wizard beard going on here.
So we have this awkward,
Yeah.
and he knows it's awkward. He's calling it out. There's a interplay between them, and neither one of them is quite apologizing.
Yeah.
But what they do is they say, let's forget about it and start over.
Right.
So instead of acknowledging that they both did wrong, they were just like, well, let's just pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah, it's a good thing humans never do that. Yeah, so they have breakfast and yeah, like you said, they just agree that they're going to start over.
They're talking, and the section that I found interesting here is she asks, how old were you before you realized you were different?
Yeah, and that is an interesting question because then going back on what we've seen, okay, he can't physically cry. And so the question of how alien is alien, he was 6 or 7 before he realized he was different.
Yeah. On one level, it must not be totally alien because I'm imagining he's playing with the other kids out on the playground.
Yeah. So there's some kind of definitely bipedal and,
Yeah.
and humanoid.
Yeah. Has arms.
Yeah.
But it wasn't so much my physical makeup as it was the reaction of those around me. He says, even as I talked, I could feel her eyes probing the sun squirt gold of my face and the pupilless orbs of blue which cratered my optic nerves. And yet there was no contempt or fear in her gaze, only interest. So I continued.
Yeah. So we definitely get, he does have a different skin color. He is yellow gold, and his eyes are definitely alien.
Yeah. So they're blue and they appear to be like all blue.
Yes. Yeah. My mother was born of peasant stock and lived in a small village in the Rhone Valley. As might be expected, when she became inexplicably pregnant at 14, there was the usual widespread gossip and slanderous speculation. I'm sorry. 14 is so young.
It is.
Yeah. I felt that 14 was incredibly young when I was 14. And then as an adult, I thought that 14 was incredibly young. But now with children and nieces and nephews and the neighbors, and 14 is so young.
Yeah. And yet we allow these 14-year-olds to drive and...
Well, yes. Have cell phones.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's scary. Right there, that was only the beginning.
Right.
I was born and the controversy took on added dimensions. So we have people wondering if he's a demon.
Yes. Some people said I was a demon, others a god.
But then scientists start showing up.
Yes. It's not just, oh, your baby has a slight birth defect, and so we're going to spread rumors about it. It's obviously so dramatically different that NASA's involved.
Yeah. They're aware of other births around the world, too.
Yeah. So he's not a one-off. And so now we're finding out, okay, there's something going on, not just in France, but also in other countries. Children who were like me, part human, part something else.
There's a interesting section here where she asked, they never did find out who or what was responsible, did they?
Yeah. So the impression we're getting here is of an Earth-wide phenomenon of a limited time frame. A bunch of babies are born around the same time that all have similar characteristics.
Yeah. So they show up and they're gold colored with solid blue eyes.
Yeah. And then they did a bunch of tests, and he says tests have been conducted and the results have shown some of our faculties would be of great resource on a planet not specifically suited for Earth-type humans. So he's definitely humanoid, but there's something that could be adapted to some different environment, which is not specified.
No, it's not. There's a comment here about how he can see in the dark.
Yes.
And this kind of recasts some of the earlier interactions they've had because it's at night at certain points and he gets up when it's dark.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're, okay, so he got up, but he's not having problems navigating in the dark. So
yeah, he says perfect vision in near darkness, a couple of extra senses for another, but that's not really elaborated on.
No, and he leaves that vague throughout the story. He ends with, and that's all we have on an empirical level.
Yeah, and then Abby says, what about the idea of bioevolutionary hybridization then? He says that's pretty well accepted too. Some people, chauvinists and racists mostly, see it's called out here,
Mm-hmm.
see it as blasphemous, but they're a minority. Scientists claim our strain will help strengthen humanity, give it new blood.
Yeah, so there's a section in here where we start to understand why the U.S. has contracted an alien sex worker to go around and have babies with the women of the U.S.
Yeah, because they want whatever this is to be bred into the population.
Yeah, because we get that alphas are immune to most known diseases.
Yep.
And there's also a predicted lifespan of several centuries.
Right.
Earlier on, I was wondering about the age disparity, but here we get it's a predicted longer lifespan. So he's not necessarily a very old alien, but he's going to live a couple centuries.
And that also adds dimension to the name of the Golden Youth. Literally, physically golden, and then whether he's particularly youthful at this moment or not, the expectation is that he will live a very long time. His youth will be stretched out.
Yeah. And then she's bantering with him. And,
yes.
And she calls him a stud that for a small fee
yes.
gets room and board for a few months. And then she makes fun of him, like, because you're helping save the world.
By having sex with a beautiful woman.
Uh-huh.
Every man's dream. Sorry, was that... Now I'm being sexist.
Yeah. Wow. So mean. Sexism on the internet? I don't know if we'll be able to publish this.
I don't know. Man, this is it. We're canceled.
So all of this is in the context. He ends with, because they're able to talk, he's not thinking about the difficulties they had yesterday.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
And he's like, oh, yeah, no, we'll be fine. That was just starting off.
Yeah. He wants to go sightsee around Boston. And then we jump to another chapter 5. This one's even shorter. 1, 2, 3, 4, half a week, then 2 more. Our relationship defined itself. Simply put, it was more than friendship, less than love. So apparently ignoring your problems early on in the relationship is a recipe for 2-month contractual bliss.
Every fairy tale, but if it was realistic.
Exactly. We can get along for 2 months. It'll work. So he said, I was enjoying myself, though, after 6 months of being on the road and sleeping with road groupies. It was nice to wake up to soft octosonic music and rose and sandalwood scented air. He likes the physical comfort of living in her very nice house. And apparently he did spend 6 months, says, on the road. So I don't know, Dharma bums kind of thing.
I get the sense, and maybe this is a bad interpretation on my part, but he talks about with road groupies, sleeping with road groupies. He's just bumming around and people are picking him up, but that's what the U.S. has him here for.
Yeah, they basically want him to be here to produce as many children as possible.
Yeah. So a contract is a step above the way he's usually living.
Yeah. But again, that sort of not really figuring out the details of the contract where he seems to be secure. There is something secure here. He's a government-backed gigolo. He has some kind of broad social and governmental support where he doesn't have to worry about providing for himself.
He starts talking about how, I got to make the joke, she's not like other girls.
Yeah, she's not like other girls. With most contracts, you get frayed at the end stereotypes. I guess that's somebody who's failing the hot, crazy scale. Or, and this is my favorite line, or some middle-aged matron, as the podcast's only middle-aged matron, who starved for sex and babies. That's not a fun stereotype. But no, Abby's not like other girls. She doesn't care about publicities, and she could have had as much sex and as many babies as she wanted. She didn't have to seek him out.
Yeah, because she's wealthy and unattached.
Yeah, and attractive. She could have been a debutante. So that means she's got that classic East Coast tall blonde beauty look.
I don't have much else there for 5. Did you?
No, I think that about covers it. Obviously, he's seen the seamier side of life with the road groupies and the middle-aged matrons. And now, Tuesday evening, somewhere in the 4th week.
And this is where we get, they're up on the terrace and they're
Yes.
stargazing, star watching.
Yes.
And he's pointing out the constellations.
Yes, because apparently he's very well educated in astronomy, but he's passing it off as another hobby.
Yeah. So if he has an architectural degree and now an astronomy degree, he's definitely playing dumber than he is, but he's also much more educated than he's indicating to everyone.
Yeah, and this also is another indication that maybe he's not super young because he's had time to get an architectural degree and an astronomy degree.
So I finish by pointing out Cassiopeia. It's shaped like an M. Behind it, you can see the Milky Way and the hazy center of our galaxy, the crowded part of heaven, as they say.
And yet there's always room for another star, Abby said wistfully.
I was surprised. I hadn't thought she was listening. You make me say the sexist line.
Sorry. Okay, yeah, that was mean of me.
You know what? I should just point out the other thing here where he's like, yeah, I was talking, but Abby was feigning interest in what a man was saying.
Well, you get a guy talking about his hobby and blah, blah, blah.
I wish I could disagree with that, but some of my most uncomfortable times are when people, generally men, start talking about their hobbies, and it's, oh my gosh.
As if we were all interested.
Mm-hmm. So this should be a clue. We have the story title. Yes. Growing up in a rural area, when it talks about the Milky Way, I live in the city now, so I do not see the Milky Way the way I used to when I was growing up. But there's definitely that white belt across the sky at night.
This is something I've ranted about quite a bit. If you did grow up in the city and if you live in the city and you don't go camping in remote places or travel to remote places, then you don't see the Milky Way, which is extremely strange. And I found this out as a teacher, having students who were not familiar with the appearance of the Milky Way because they had always lived in the city. And I also grew up in a rural area, a different rural area than Brent. But yeah, every night, if there are not clouds, you see it.
This is his comment. I reprimanded her and...
Men. Sorry. You got that line too.
Yeah. He says, if you want to add something, first you have to subtract something. You have to take before you can give. He's casting this in terms of, yes, she said there's always room for another star, but he's thinking of this in terms of, well, there's only so much interstellar gas, like you have gravitational fields that you have to
He's saying this very much from I have a degree in astronomy perspective.
Yeah. They're talking past each other.
Yeah, because what she's talking about is that she was lonely and misanthropic, and she decided that taking out a contract and trying to have a child and having a child and motherhood would add meaning to her life.
Oh, God, I read that and I'm just like, oh, boy, I've heard people say stupid stuff like that before, and it never, ever works out.
You can't just acquire a child in order to have meaning. They're their own person.
What? A child is a human being, too?
You can't even acquire a dog to have meaning in your life because a dog is also a separate being. Now, dogs aren't a very good example of this because they will do a good job of making you feel like you're the center of the universe. But get yourself a cat. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know if I have more meaning or not. I know there is meaning in the universe, but it's just knocking water glasses off my counter.
So having a teenager is similar to having a cat is what you're saying.
I'm very much saying that. And this is also reminding me of a wolf line. Is it from The Sorcerer's House that a house is like a cat? Because you name your house, but it doesn't respond to its name like a cat doesn't. I think that's from a wolf story.
I'm not sure. It's not coming to mind at the moment. So
no big deal.
Yeah. So her taking the astronomy and recontextualizing it, as she calls it, localize it to human interactions.
Yes.
Getting all this is what she's getting at.
Yeah. And then this is actually cute. She's like, I didn't have room for you in my life before, or I didn't know, but now I have you in my life. And I stopped her before she got carried away. But you lost something in the gaining. What? Loneliness. Now that's a little cheesy.
That is.
Yes. Although she does cry.
Like a woman.
Just like a woman.
Sorry, was that my line?
I mean, like a human who has functioning tear ducts.
Yeah. So what are you getting at? I asked. Just this. There's always room for something else in your life or in the universe, no matter how replete or surfeited you think the system in question has become. I had room for you, but a year ago my plans didn't include any such possibility. There's another section down here.
Yeah.
Where I highlighted, and this is him responding.
Yes.
There's no room anywhere in the universe unless you make room for it. Because, barring displacement, the crowded part of heaven is closed, it's shut, and locked up tight.
And is that the way you feel about me? Sorry, that was her line.
Oh, okay. I felt a lump growing in my throat. It's the way I feel about contracts in general.
Yeah, he's not really enjoying this gigolo life. I've run up against too many petty ambitions and too much selfishness. For most women, I'm an ego booster, or I transfix their ostentatiousness. They can show me off to the world like they would an African lion. Or is that an African-American lion, Brent?
It could be either.
Okay.
We have lions in America.
Or they can make love to me and brag to their friends about my prowess as a stud. But I can't afford to get personally involved with people like that. I'd break down, go crazy. I can't allow anyone to reach through to me. I'm too vulnerable.
How would you interpret the gender roles there that are...
I don't know. I think Borski's playing with this, right? What is it? Okay, this would be discourse from relatively recent past about women say they want men to be emotional and vulnerable, but then if they show vulnerability, then they're like, you're not very manly, are you? And then are disgusted and put off by it.
He's also the valuable one.
He is, which is super interesting.
At least the U.S. government thinks he's the valuable one.
The U.S. government thinks he's the valuable one. Although, of course, historically, it's definitely always been flipped.
Yeah.
Because a woman has to invest an enormous amount of resources into growing another human being. And a man doesn't so much unless he chooses to.
Yeah. Abby was crying like a woman.
Yes. And then she says, what if the person you're contracted to falls in love with you?
It's never happened to me, I said.
It has now, Dennis.
I said nothing. Instead, I turned...
What a man.
Yeah.
He's not alien at all.
Are you saying that in his alienness, he found his true humanity?
Yes, yes.
It reminds me of, there's a line in Futurama where Leela says something, it's, Fry's not a robot, he's a man. And Bender's like, what's the difference?
Yes.
He said nothing. Instead, I turned my face towards the sky and watched the stars. They were laughing at me.
Yeah, there we go. All right. We jump to chapter 7. And now the Massachusetts Eugenics Board. Oh, shades of racism here. And Abby has had now a positive pregnancy test.
Yeah. And he's encouraging her to contact the... it feels so weird saying eugenics board.
Yeah.
Wow, didn't we leave that?
Alien Eugenics Board. I don't know if that makes it better.
Yeah. So he wants her to contact them. Apparently, reading through here between the lines, he gets kickback.
Yeah, for any successful contact.
Yeah. He also mentions, and I don't know if he's just saying this to make sure she contacts them, but he's saying that some people, once they realize they're pregnant, they don't contact the eugenics board because they decide to go get an abortion instead, or they want to raise the child.
And sell it off as a prostitute.
Yeah.
And she's horrified at that suggestion. And it does seem to be at least somewhat manipulative on his part. If you don't do this, then I'm going to lump you together in my mind with the people who are selling their children.
So, and then he ends section 7, and I knew I had to leave.
Yeah, and apparently part of the standard contract is if she gets pregnant successfully, he gets to leave early.
Yeah.
So it's 2 months or first pregnancy.
Any commentary there from a feminist perspective, Amanda? Gender roles?
I don't know, Brent. Is there anything here to comment on? Like, okay, here we are. You are pregnant and now the father leaves.
No, the government's taking care of her.
Sorry. The government's going to take care of her. Yeah, there's no social or cultural commentary there.
No, there's not. Chapter 8, Section 8,
Yeah.
is a flashback.
Yeah, it was like this. 8 months ago, I was in California on the vagabond circuit. So apparently there's a whole, it's a whole thing.
And I ran into an outlawed colony of alphas. They were rebels in trouble with the government, having refused to contribute to sperm and egg banks. Parenthetical, a law. We had to do so twice yearly. They had gone into hiding, into drifting, but that's not all. They are also trying to pass as humans by wearing dark glasses and taking melanin tablets and chemical injections to change the color of their hair and skin. They could come close physically and mentally. All they had to do was play up their emotions and ignore their alien faculties.
Yeah. So we've got a group of people trying to pass as human, a group of alphas trying to pass as human and disguising themselves. Again, no cultural commentary at all there.
No cultural commentary. On a single line, he says, it was disgusting.
Yeah. Like a black refusing to acknowledge his color, or an Oriental his eyes. I could never do that, and I tried to tell the others it was wrong for them to do so.
It's interesting here because black, so refusing to acknowledge his skin, then an Oriental his eyes. Once again, he's put into a role where there's a larger culture.
Mm-hmm.
And part of me was thinking about years ago, I saw a news thing where they had in Korea and Japan, they were...
Oh, right. The lid surgery.
Yeah, the lid surgery, so they'd have the fold in the eyes.
Yeah.
Like that was a cosmetic beauty statement, and just the black refusing to acknowledge his color. That's something that comes up a lot, where you get slurs on both sides, where sometimes you'll get people calling a black man an Oreo, and it's like, what? It's
right,
like,
because of mixed ancestry.
Yeah, mixed ancestry. Or I've heard it like, oh, he's thinking like a white person. And
right, or using standard English, the standard English diction, you're talking white.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then, of course, there's also the whole layer of people with mixed ancestry working very hard to pass as white, because in time of Jim Crow, and also in all of American history, where passing as white protected people from racist aggression and from those laws.
Yeah. So once again, like you brought up early on, like this is all baked into the story, and he's half alien and half human. And we even get that, like, oh yeah, well, my kids are only going to be 1/4 alien.
Right. And so he finds it disgusting that people would opt out of forced reproduction because it's denying what makes them special. There are layers here. I think the forced reproduction part and the eugenics board part, it's supposed to bother us, the prostitution aspect of this. And it's also clear from this passage that there are male and female alien human hybrids. So we've been seeing the male prostitution side of it, but how do we even start to unpack what it would be like for a female alpha? Obviously, it takes a lot more out of a woman. I think I just said that.
Yeah.
But he regards their existence as a gift to humanity. And that gift is something that is owed to humanity to make humanity better.
This section's, for me, where it really came home. Because, like, oh, you're on the U.S. government's payroll to do all this. And the other thing, too, in the background of my mind that I was thinking that's not explicitly stated on the page, if the U.S. is contracting him to do this, this is somewhat of a future genetic Cold War, so to speak, because if the U.S., which I'm assuming he's projecting as superpower into the future here, when 74, when he wrote this, the U.S. has the money to hire all these golden youths.
Yeah.
And so then they're being essentially bought and sold to increase the genetic, like the immune resistance and the longevity of the U.S. population, where poorer third world countries, they're not going to be able to do this.
Right.
So.
Yeah, all of that is in the background there.
Yay, nothing like taking a eugenics program and turning it into a superpower
Yeah. This is definitely shades of, not to invoke Godwin's law here, but the breeding of a super race. We've seen this before, and it was, of course, explicitly paired with the destruction of those viewed to be inferior. Here in the context of the story, we're not getting that framing of it. But this character, he's clearly on one side of that debate, but he knows many of his fellows are not.
Yeah.
So he decided he wasn't going to go with the outlaw band. He only hangs out with them a very short amount of time. He has a destiny to fulfill and more life to engender. And that's why he went to Boston and why he contracted with Abby. And now Abby's pregnant and she's fallen in love with him, but he doesn't want to stay with her because if he does, then he can't make a lot more babies.
Earlier on, the scene in the early chapters, like, that's what he really wants, that he's repressing. He just wants a normal...
Yes, that's his fantasy. That's what gets him going, is the idea that he could be just a normal husband with a normal wife and children. But then he also calls out the risk of that. He's not rejecting something that's possible because he says if he stays with her, he'll watch her die, watch their children die, and their children too, because he's a genetic freak, not a human being. He's going to outlive them. So while his genetic material may make humanity more long-lived, he's going to be the longest lived as this first generation of this blended humanity. And so even if that fantasy he's not just rejecting it in order to fulfill some abstract destiny, he's rejecting it because it's not really actually possible. He could live through that and then die of heartbreak, or live with heartbreak, which is worse than dying of heartbreak, I think.
There's a line here towards the end where he says arrogance and pride were human fallibilities, like love and hate and greed and envy.
But we weren't human.
We were something more than that.
Yeah.
I feel like he said somewhat arrogantly and prideful.
After or before going on to say that he did love. Yeah. So this is sort of the Spock problem. You're half Vulcan, half human, and that means that you're going to be inconsistently unemotional.
Yeah. There's just so much internal conflict in him here in this. Like, the more you read and ponder it, it's like, oh yeah, this is not a fun or a good story, and this is not a future that I would want to live in.
Yeah, no matter how golden the golden youth are.
So we get 9. He knew he had to leave, and then 9. She took it better than I expected. With tears, but with grace.
Right. Aw.
So his explanation is, because I'm falling in love with you, Abby, and I've been falling in love with you ever since our second day here.
Conveniently after our fight and after we agreed to ignore our fight.
Yep. So he reiterates what he'd been thinking about. I can't have a normal life. And she basically accepts it. And we have one night left before I leave.
Yeah, we'll always have Paris.
Yep. And then he wishes that time would slow down, but it didn't happen.
Yeah. It was night again before I reached the Boston city limits. By then the air was cool and the stars were blazing forth. I sought out and found the Milky Way, remembering what I had said, remembering I was wrong.
I had learned the hard way, but I had learned. There was no conservation involved, because in the crowded part of heaven, there's always room for pain.
A little melodramatic, but also life is melodramatic, and so it rings true.
Wait, so when a man says these things, it's melodramatic. But when a woman says these things, she's just emotionally healthy.
Yes, this is exactly what I was saying.
Dear listener, comment on what you think. No,
like, comment, and subscribe.
No, it's interesting how the gender issue rears its head again here at the end. But there we have it. The crowded part of heaven. You don't have to remove something. Now he's bearing more pain.
Yeah, and I think necessarily. I think I'm with the rebel group that's wandering the United States, avoiding their obligation to provide sperm and eggs. And there is a comment in there that union between two alphas is apparently sterile, but they're still choosing a companionship and a life apart rather than going through this try to interact with people who are going to die younger than we are, people we can't have a permanent connection with, just to somehow give the US its edge.
So there's the end of In the Crowded Part of Heaven. What all did you think of the story, Amanda?
I don't know that Borski's style is exactly my style. It's a little heavier handed than I typically enjoy, but he's doing the kinds of things that I do enjoy, which is playing with big themes, and he's using speculative fiction in that. Put some philosophical question into some context and play with it. So I like that this is where his imagination goes.
Yeah. If you were to call out themes in this, what do you think are some of the big ideas that he's playing with?
This is probably too obvious, but what does it mean to be human?
Yeah.
We obviously talked quite a bit about the gender and racial dynamics and how he's playing with those roles.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's about it.
I listed out a few here that might be of interest.
Oh, so this was a leading question?
It was not a leading question.
So Brent, if you were to be drawing some themes out of Borski's In the Crowded Part of Heaven, what would you think would be the most important ones?
Since this is a Wolf podcast, I have mapped these back to several themes that Wolf tends to continuously go back to. But one of them I had was the mixing of species to elevate, potentially both species. So Wolf plays around with this a lot. Like in Wizard Knight, we get the elves and the humans.
Yes.
In Solar Cycle, we get so many things I can't even begin to exhaustively list them.
Yes.
There's the man-apes. There's humans in Megatheriums, or at least implied, with Juturna trying to seduce Severian. There's the dogmen.
Yep.
Cacogens seem to interbreed with humans. And what all that means, are those humans that have evolutionarily diverged? Are those like what we'd consider true aliens? Not sure. We get the Green Man. With the Green Man, we get the implication that there is a cross flow of genes across time, too. So we, in the most literal interpretation of a reticulated genealogy, I'm not even going to go into long and short sun and trying to
say the chems and...
Yeah, so it gets very complicated. So
Yeah.
it is something that comes up. And then based on that is like the sense that the next step of evolution, whatever that looks like, is difficult for both parties because there's a transition between the old and the new. I think this is something Wolf toys with in the play with eschatology and Genesis. But if I'm thinking about this in different terms, it's like, oh, I'm the first multicellular organism. It's like in a single cell world. Yay. It's like,
right.
Well, that looks odd. I'm the first fish that crawled up on land. It's like I was the first hominid that used a tool. Like these are weird events that change everything. And it's hard for everyone involved. And we get that in eschatology and Genesis, where it's like, well, the flood happens and there's the next step in evolution. And you alluded to this in The Crowded Part of Heaven, where, yeah, his genes are being incorporated into the human race for reasons we never know. It's completely unknown. But as you said, he's the longest lived. And I mean, you get this sense of, to kind of cast it in biblical terms, it's like the post-flood world where there's, like before, there were long-lived, and in one sense, he's kind of one of those long-lived people, but his genes are being diluted. And so, yes, maybe more long life is being brought into humanity, and more a boosted immune system is part of that. But he's going to watch his kids die, and he's going to watch all the people he potentially loved die. And then I think the last point that I wanted to call out, which I think is the strongest, is that pain is connected with learning and growing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those last lines there. And then it's like, oh, I gain pain. And there's always room for that, even if it is crowded. And so
Maybe he'll learn to identify with human emotions more as he experiences more pain.
Yeah, maybe. And we don't get a sense in here what any of this means. It happened, and the U.S. government comes in and it's,
Right.
well, okay, alien sex workers, we'll put them on the government roll.
Yep.
And we don't get any sense of why. He has no sense of why. He doesn't know who his father is. There's just, he's born on Earth and he's different, as he realizes when he's 6 or 7. There's no sense of closure for him. And the bit of closure we get at the end is like, oh, well, this sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of the ones that I was thinking about.
Well, I think that was a better answer than mine.
No, sorry. I wasn't.
No,
I was
teasing.
not setting you up for, oh, look at how bad these answers are, Amanda.
Oh, yeah. Well, I hadn't really reflected on those themes and ideas. And that wolf connection, I think, is, yeah, how did I miss that? Or how did that not be the first thing that occurred to me? Because, of course, when I said, what does it mean to be human? That seems to me one of the overriding questions that Wolf asks in a consistent way and answers in a creative way. Yeah, that seems a really strong connection to me.
Yeah. And so it makes sense that if Wolf was writing in the same themes, I can see why Borski was drawn to Wolf's answers and creative interpretations. Sure. So that part makes sense.
Well, do you have anything else?
I don't think so. Would you recommend this story?
Oh, certainly. Especially if you enjoy the kinds of things that Wolf does. I think that you would enjoy reading this.
Yeah, I would recommend. I've read a few other early Borski short stories. They definitely have their own flavor. So I'm surprised that they're not more collected. Like you can't just go out and buy one. But hopefully if listeners enjoy some Borski, we can do the other ones.
Yeah, that would be great. The Unreliable Narrators are Amanda Patchen and Brent Towle. And, as Gene Wolfe said, that which you call nothing is what holds all things apart.
Kyrie.